Today we're on the final chapter of Philippians, chapter 4, and we're going to start at verse 1 and then go down to verse 9. Therefore, my dear brothers and sisters, stay true to the Lord. I love you and long to see you. Dear friends, for you are my joy and the crown I receive from my work. Now, I appeal to Euodia and Syntyche, please, because you belong to the Lord, settle your disagreement. And I ask you, my true partner, the true partner is apparently called Syzygus. There you go. I ask you to help these two women, for they worked hard with me in telling others the good news. They worked along with Clement and the rest of my co-workers, whose names are written in the book of life. Always be full of joy in the Lord. I say it again, rejoice. Let everyone see that you are considerate in all you do. Remember, the Lord is coming soon. Because we're in the final chapter of this letter Paul's writing, just like the rest of his letters, it tends to get quite specific. And towards the end of the letter, he begins to speak about particular situations, about the particular church he's talking to at that particular time. And it can be weird reading it, but one thing we can always take from it as we read it today is it's that reminder that this isn't this fluffy these aren't fluffy words that's come out of nowhere. This was written by a real person to real people in a very real time, just like today, just like me and you. This is a genuine letter, and that's a really cool thing to remember. This isn't just, it's not only an amazing work of art that we can still study today, it's also a personal piece from one person to another. It's a really special perspective to keep in mind. Also do note that he's talking about these two women in the church, but it seems like they're leaders at the forefront. It's so clear that when he was in Philippi, these two women were right there in the thick of things, and they were fundamental in that early time starting this church. Paul gets in a lot of trouble for being sexist, for things he says in other letters, but let's remember that here he clearly cares a lot about these two female leaders who worked right beside him, and he even says they're on par with the rest of my co-workers. That's just a really cool thing to note, because despite this argument of is Paul sexist, it's clear that these two women were given a very important role and did amazing work. Paul then goes on to write what is hands down the most quoted and well-known verse and verses in this letter, and it's a classic for Sunday school memory verses, so a lot of you might actually already know this one, but there's good reason why it's so well known, because it is such powerful words. So this is verse 6 onwards. Don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank Him for all He has done. Then you will experience God's peace, which exceeds anything we can understand. His peace will guard your hearts and minds as you live in Christ Jesus. And now, dear brothers and sisters, one final thing. Fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise. Keep putting into practice all you have learned and received from me. Everything you have heard from me and saw me doing, then the God of peace will be with you. Unfortunately, from a very young age, I was struggling with mental health issues, and when I was 12, maybe 13, I can't remember, I started going to therapy. So I was really young going to counselling. But one of the main things that I was learning at that young age, and that they were trying to teach me and kind of make me learn to help my mental health, was this thing called CBT. It was like a discipline. It's like this kind of method, and it was a muscle that I had to train. But CBT stands for Cognitive Behavioral Therapy. Now, before I keep going on this story, keep in mind I am not trained in this area. I am not a studied psychologist. I've just spent quite a lot of time in therapy and receiving psychotherapy. So I don't say this in an actually academic way. It's purely just what I learned on the receiving end. But cognitive behavioral therapy was basically this art, this practice of firstly reflecting on what is in your brain, what you're thinking, how you're feeling. It was this kind of practice of stopping what you're doing and becoming aware of what's going on inside your brain and how you're doing. And then through CBT, through the different things, the different methods of CBT, you would take those feelings, take those thoughts, and try basically control them. It was this discipline of seeing how you're doing and then taking the thoughts you don't want, the thoughts that aren't helpful, the thoughts that are hurtful, and almost like putting them in a bin, getting them out of your brain, controlling them and tossing them out, and then taking good thoughts and taking helpful thoughts and helpful feelings and feelings that were important and productive and holding on to them and like keeping them in your brain so that you can use them for throughout your day. One of the imageries that I was given was it's like every thought is a cloud that goes through your brain, and if there's a cloudy, kind of stormy, rainy cloud that you didn't want in your sky, you let it just float on away. You just let it go past, go in your head, and then right back out. But then you would try hold on to the fluffy clouds and the lovely clouds in your head, and you would try keep them in your sky. And it's a very childish way to say it, but it's a good way to explain it. Where you basically started looking up and looking at what was in your sky, what you're thinking, how you're feeling, and then either letting the clouds float away or trying to keep those thoughts in your brain. Then we zoom forward 5 years, say, and I started going to church, and I started really getting into faith, and I was becoming a Christian, and very quickly you start hearing people in church talk about prayer. They say, pray always, pray about everything, make sure you're praying out so much in your life, it's crucial. I'd be like, oh, what's prayer? And they'd say, oh, it's talking to God. I was like, well, what do I pray about? What do I talk to God about? And they'd say, well, like anything and everything. Pray about how you're feeling and what you're doing and what's in your life and what you need help with and how other people are doing. Pray for everyone else. And I was like, oh, and it's like pray about just what is in your life. And I was like, oh, so reflecting on how you're doing and reflecting on where you're at and how you're feeling and just becoming aware of it, right? And then I was like, so what does prayer do? And they would reference this verse, and they'd say like, well, pray about everything, tell God what you need. And also, like, as well as telling what you need, you can thank him for all he has done. I was like, wow. And then they said, then as you do that, you'll experience peace. And basically, look, you can see where I'm going with this link that I was making in my head was I would see prayer and the act of reflecting on what I need prayer for and then doing something with those thoughts, actively handing it over to God or thinking about the good things. And I was like, I've done this. This is just like CBT. And I'm sure some people are listening to this and spiritual gurus who know loads about prayer are probably saying, prayer is more complicated than that, it's more simple. Or I'm sure some academic psychologists are kind of hearing this and being like, that's not what CBT is. It's not. And look, I'm sorry if I'm butchering it, but for me, as I read this verse, it's so hard not to see what is now a fundamental part of psychology and something that today we understand is such a healthy thing for our mental health and to function as humans. Paul wrote this as a guide of what prayer can do and what we should do with our minds 2,000 years ago. And 2,000 years ago, he was teaching us how to do CBT or mindfulness and saying this is a crucial part of being a Christian. Don't worry about anything, instead pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank him for all that he has done. Then you will experience God's peace, which exceeds anything we can understand. One final thing, fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise. Guys, as we pray, what we get to do is we slow down and we think about where we're at. We think about what we're doing and what's going on in our lives and the people around us. And we just have to become aware. How am I? What's going through my mind? What's going through my life? And then what we get to do is take that, and just like with the clouds, you let them float away, hold on, we get to do even one step more than that. We get to go to God and say, I need help with this, I'm scared about this, I'm worried about it, I need your help. And we get to hand it over to God, and He shares the burden. And then on top of that, as we're praying and reflecting, if we find things that we are so grateful for, things that we are blessed in, helpful thoughts, productive things in our lives, we get to go to God and say, thank you for blessing me with it. We get to go to the Father who gives us good gifts and says, thank you because you are a part of this as well. We get to train our minds. That's what CBT is. It's a muscle that we work out. It's this art that we get to perfect of training our brain to take those things that are evil, that are scary, that are hurtful, and we have somewhere to put them. We have something to do with them. We have someone to help us with it. That's what Paul's saying. Hold that thought and admit that, hey, I need help with this. I'm struggling, and then give it to God. But almost train yourself to say, I'm okay because I can have God's help with this. Then at the same time, train yourself to catch the good things and say, God, thank you for giving it to me. And even on top of that, we get to train our brains to fix our thoughts on one really amazing thing. He says, fix your thoughts on what is true, what is honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. We get to train our muscle to actually just focus on what is good and what this amazing thing that we have, that we get to fix our mind on the heavenly things, on this life of Jesus Christ. And what's the point of this? Paul tells us that as our muscle becomes stronger, as we practice this art of prayer and reflection, we get a peace from God that exceeds anything we can understand. We get a reward that isn't anything like we have here on earth. We get a reward from the God, our Father, who lives in heaven. He blesses us with a peace that is like nothing else. What I love, one of the things that I've noticed about Philippians, this letter that I've completely fallen for and just absolutely adored, is Paul takes all the aspects of the Christian life, of our human experience, everything that we do each day, and he says, this is how we focus our lives. This is how we find joy in it. This is how we find peace. First, he says, physically, practically, we have to go and imitate Jesus. We have to live our lives practically like him. Let's go and love each other. Let's stand up for what is righteous and just. Let's bless each other. Let's worship God. It's practical. Physically go and find a way to bring his kingdom today. Then he says spiritually, let's remember that we are citizens of heaven. Spiritually, let's remember where our home is. We don't have to compare ourselves. We know where our spirit and soul belongs. We get to worship. Spiritually, we get to worship the Creator. And then finally he says mentally, emotionally, almost like that third part of this triangle of life. He says mentally we get to train our muscle to focus on the greatest thing that there is. We get to train our brains to be able to handle those hard thoughts, those hurtful thoughts, and we get to give them over. We have somewhere to put them. He says we train our brains to replace those bad thoughts with what is excellent and what is good. And almost if you take all of this, Paul's saying, as you take all of this, that's where you find Jesus. Through this practical thing, through spiritually believing and having that faith, and through mentally training that muscle, you find the peace of Jesus Christ. You get to live that good life where at the end of the race you can say, I am proud and I have focused on the best reward there is. this is the Christian life. Philippians is explaining the Christian life. So as you listen today, do you need to practice the practical and the physical? Do you need to just get up, have a kick in the ass and just say, who can I love today? What can I serve? What charity can I help with? Who can I bless? Spiritually, do you need to remember that all that matters is just faith? You don't need to be doing all these impressive things. Our spiritual home is in heaven where Jesus Christ lives. It's the faith that matters, and that's amazing as it is. Remember, it's faith that matters. And then mentally, is this the muscle you need to train? And like I said yesterday, I mentioned mental health yesterday. Maybe you need help with that. Maybe you need to talk to some people like me, get therapy. But ultimately, is it that mental muscle that you need to train up and get stronger in? To not worry about anything, but remember, let those clouds pass and give them to God. And then we can set our minds on what is good, what is excellent, what is ultimately heavenly. Through these three aspects, that is where we find God, where we find the life of Jesus Christ. We find the peace that exceeds anything that is on this earth. I'm sorry that these videos have been going on longer as the letter goes on, but I'm actually getting more excited and more amazed by the words here. So please, God, you've enjoyed them and they haven't. You've been getting this excitement that I've been getting. But hey, tomorrow we're finishing up. I'm going to close this series and we're on our final few verses of this book. So I'm excited to see how Paul concludes this entire letter. So God bless, guys. Stay safe, and I'll see you tomorrow and hopefully see you in person very soon. See you later.